Hello, and thanks for joining me for another Surround album review here on Life in Surround. Today's album I've been meaning to get to for quite some time. The exciting thing about it for me is that I discovered it because of this fascination with surround music. It is 1985's Misplaced Childhood, redone recently for a deluxe book set, like a box set in a book. So you get a cool book about the album, about the band's history at the time. You get the album remastered, you get the album remixed by Steven Wison in stereo. You get a complete live concert from the time, with a complete playthrough of Misplaced Childhood, by the way. And most importantly for us surround heads, for us surroundophiles, you get a Blu-ray with the album remixed into 5.1 and a documentary, like an interview with the band pretty recently. Reunited with Fish for the interview, so it's nice to see all 5 of them together. And you get some bonus videos like the promo videos from the time. So quite a lot of content in this here book set, and as you can see, my copy was signed by the remaining 4 members of the band. They now have a different singer, Steve Hogarth. Anyway, but back at this time in 1985, they were playing with the singer known as Fish. So anyhow, today we're going to discuss the deluxe edition of Misplaced Childhood, particularly, per usual around here, the surround mix. So just a little bit of background on the band. For those not familiar, their mid-80s sound could be described as being a lot like early Genesis, but with a bit more of a pop emphasis, a little bit simpler style. I would say you get hooks a little more often, but you get quite a bit of excursions of instrumental playing, and I would say that saying that they hearken pretty closely to early Genesis is very fair. Now, as I stated before, I wasn't aware of this album, let alone Marillion, back in this time period. I would have been around 8 years old, and I really wasn't even beginning to discover my own music yet. But when I did several years later, my favorite artists would have been something to the tune of Kenny Rogers, MC Hammer, Guns N' Roses, and Color Me Bad. Probably just about in that order. So if that gives you an idea of where I was at. I probably heard some Marillion, or at least saw a promo video on MTV, like at somebody's house in the background. Because when I put this album on, I'm vaguely familiar with the sound. And I wasn't familiar with early Genesis at the time either, so I think I did run across Marillion, but like it didn't take for me. I didn't begin following them, it didn't sink in. And to kind of give you a sense for how big of a geek I am, I actually became familiar with The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. And if you look around this room, you can see a few Easter eggs related to that literary work. And it's my understanding that The Silmarillion inspired the band's name of Marillion. But yeah, I was familiar with Tolkien back starting in my early teens, and somehow Marillion just missed making a connection with me. But, you know, that's really my loss. And again, it's a reason why I love this hobby, because I've been given a second chance at this album. I became primarily interested in it because I learned that Steven Wison was doing the 5.1 mix. So I was an early adopter, jumped on an order just as soon as I knew about the project. I bought from the band's website, and so that's how I got the 4 signatures. Fans at the time also had the option to buy from Fish's website, and so then you would get his signature. I'm aware of a few people who even bought both so they could have all 5 signatures across the 2 book sets. But fortunate enough for me, when this book set arrived and I ingested the CD content, read through the book a little bit, watched the interview, checked out the promo videos, and then finally got around to the 5.1 mix, I was more than pleased. This is one of the happier accidents that has happened for me so far in this hobby. I really, 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 really love this album. I feel like, you know, where's it been all my life? I can't cry over spilled milk or wasted years, but this album has quickly dug in and embedded itself in the fabric of my music appreciation, especially at this time when I'm raising a 2-year-old and I get to re-experience childhood through him. And this album deals with the innocence of childhood, but then the loss of that innocence, and kind of puppy love when you're young compared to more complex love relationships when you're older. This album has a lot to unpack for me. Musically, I really dig it. I like early Genesis, and I like how they've adopted a bit more of a simple, straightforward approach that can be more accessible. It's got hooks, like I said. I could never get Kaylee out of my head if I tried. Lavender draws on an old traditional poem, and it definitely is memorable. The Heart of Lothian. You know, these hooks, even listening to them just a time or two, like instantly dig in. So this album has staying power, but it has enough excursions and textures and kind of meandering proggy weirdness that it doesn't outstay its welcome, at least not for me, not yet, and I really feel like it won't. So with all that said, let's get to the mix, because isn't that the most important thing? I'm going to give examples from the first several songs on the album. I didn't persist in taking notes or making slides beyond that, because Steven Wison does understandably recycle some of his techniques, and so I feel like what I'm about to show you is representative of what you'll experience on the album. Now, that's general. I'm sure that he does a few tricks here or there that develop later in the album, but this is a pretty good sense of what you're going to get. And you know, I really felt it was important to do a good job of explaining what you get here mix-wise, because I think this mix has met some unfair criticism that it's too tame. And the thing is, if you watch the interview and you read Steven Wilson's own notes on the album, this was recorded very sparsely, and there's not a lot in the way of overdubs for someone to really like pull out of the mix. And so you have the basics. You have the drum tracks, you have the vocal tracks, keyboard tracks, guitar tracks, and bass tracks. And I really believe that Steven Wison did an extremely efficient, effective, and economical mix for this album. You get separation like never before, and I really feel like instruments are placed very tastefully, very immersively, and most importantly, he makes extremely effective use of the surroundscape. So let's get to that. Here we have Pseudo Silk Kimono, and this is a fairly common motif for the album. You have lead vocal dominating the center channel. You have drums in the front, left, and right, but making their way out to the surrounds just to give them a lot more breadth. You have the bass anchored mostly in the front, left, and rights, and you have keys more or less isolated in one of the surrounds or the other, and guitars more or less isolated in one of the surrounds or the other. In this case, keys are on the left, guitars are on the right. And it should be stated that Wilson doesn't necessarily set a song and then let it run the whole way through. He will adopt different approaches to a mix even within the same song. So I'm giving you a snapshot in time that I feel was worth noting mix-wise. So with that, let's move on to the next song. And here we have Kaylee. And as you can see, the lead vocal still dominates the center. Drums are still doing their thing in the front, left, and right, and the surrounds. But he's moved the guitars up to the front, left, and right, and they're doing kind of an arpeggio figure instead of the swells of the first song. And he's got keys doing a chordal wash over in the surround left, and keys doing their very distinctive, memorable, chimey kind of riff back in that surround right. And then we jump into Lavender, where guitars have moved back to the surrounds. Keys are anchoring in the front, left, and rights, but they share space occasionally with guitar solos. Vocals are still dominating the center, and drums are still doing their same thing. Now, we get to the meat and potatoes of this mix. If you don't have this box set and you love surround music and you're into what Steven Wison does and you even halfway like the album, like, you have to get this for this moment. The opening of Bittersweet, I would say, is just as sweet as the long introduction to Xanadu, Steven Wison style. In fact, you get a lot of similar instrumentation. And so here we have it. Lead vocal's still anchored in the center. Bass is still up in that front, left, and right. Keys are up in the front, left, and right. Guitars are back in the surrounds. But the big thing here is he's gone the extra mile with the drums. And sometimes starting with the deep toms in the surround right and moving to the front center of the room toward the smaller toms. And sometimes starting in the surround left with the deep toms and moving to the front center of the room toward the smaller toms. You get these huge tom fills while the song is building, and you also get these echo bells. So again, this is one of the coolest moments on the album. It is definitely like a surround demo worthy moment. It absolutely suits the song. It takes the album to like a higher echelon for a moment. And I think it is fair to say that sometimes this album takes a fairly safe approach to its mix. Again, just working with what Wison was given to work with. Very economically recorded tracks without a lot of whiz-bang overdubs. And when Wison finds it appropriate, he does play with this mix, with toms wrapping around the room. Like, what more could you ask for, right? You don't get a lot of keyboard parts whiz-banging around the room, but the keyboard player isn't really providing that opportunity, in my opinion. I feel like this mix is well executed and well worth your listen. Fidelity, this sounds better than any stereo source I've compared it to. Has plenty of power, has plenty of clarity. From low end to top end, I have no issues with it. Now, self-admittedly, I am not an audiophile. All I can report is that this sounds good to me. It doesn't bug me at all. So we've covered the mix, we've covered the music, we've covered the sonics. So then let's talk value. As far as what you get in this little book set, I don't think they could have really packed much more value into it at its price point. Maybe it would have been nice if they had just offered a standalone DVD or Blu-ray, and that could maybe have dropped the price in half or something, but as it is, I think I still got it for like 30 or 40 bucks. And I have enjoyed the concert. I have enjoyed some of the demos and outtakes. I certainly have enjoyed the Blu-ray and will continue to. And it's kind of nice, you know, to get this book signed by the band. That helps me feel like I'm in touch with the material a little bit more. I'm a part of their history now. And yeah, so I would give this little book set and the 5.1 mix that it contains all around the board full marks. And this album is up on Quadraphonic Quad. I'm curious to know what I voted on, because I'm saying in front of you right now that I feel this album is a 10 out of 10. And so I'm going to go search for it on quadrophonicquad.com, my favorite place to hang out on the internet, at least as far as surround music is concerned. So I'm searching for Marillion. There we go, Misplaced Childhood. There are 2 other albums from Marillion in surround, and I will get to them eventually. And yay! I'm really happy with myself. I agree with myself. I voted a 10 on Quadrophonic Quad, and I think this is very deserving of those marks. It's a classic album from the band, I think, at or near their creative peak for that lineup, the Fish-led lineup. And they got a Steven Wison mix, and I think he pulled out all the stops that he possibly could, and he did the album justice and made things more clear, more immersive, more engaging, a little bit more interesting throughout the ride. This album is a wild ride. It's a concept album, so the inner geek in me really celebrates that. For anybody wondering why I'm wearing a kilt, it's just to be in solidarity with this man, Fish, who gave us an incredible artistic work in Misplaced Childhood, and as things stand, one of his other brilliant works has already been mixed into surround, and I hope to get to that pretty soon, and hopefully more of his work will receive a wonderful surround treatment as well. So this has been Life in Surround, a surround album review, Misplaced Childhood. I've been meaning to get to this album for quite some time. I hope to get to tons of albums. Me and what time? It's a good problem to have that I honestly think there's more awesome surround content out there, even already in my collection, than I think I can possibly get to on this channel. But I'll try for you and for me. I hope you're enjoying this channel. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. Either way, leave comments. Let me know what you think about Misplaced Childhood, about the 5.1 mix, about Steven Wison, about me. Call me names. Give suggestions. I appreciate it all. Subscribe if you haven't. And until next time, I'll just remind you, per usual, to live life in surround.